Qualified, professional, and compassionate doctors talking real solutions to real health problems.
Today on the DocTalk show, we are privileged to host two neurologists from Mulago Hospital. Mr. Idro Richard is a pediatric neurologist. That means he's a doctor who helps children who have diseases of the brain. You're most welcome, Dr. Richard.
Hello, viewers.
And our second guest for the show is Dr. Museveri Abdul, who is a neurologist who treats adults. These are people above the age of 18 who have problems with their brains. So he also welcome.
Hello, viewers.
Dr. Abdul. And tonight on the DocTalk show, we are discussing a common disease that affects people. It's a disease that's poorly understood, has lots of misconceptions and myths around it. This condition is called epilepsy. So our guest doctors this evening will help us demystify this condition called epilepsy, what exactly it means, and demystify some of the myths surrounding this condition, and most importantly, how people who are suffering from this condition can be helped and how their families can be supported. So once again, we welcome you, our doctors, Dr. Richard and Dr. Abdul, to the DocTalk show. And,
Thank you.
yes, and as I introduced, epilepsy is a condition that's poorly understood by the community. In your field, you're a specialist in the field of diseases that affect the brain, and you know epilepsy is a condition that arises from the brain. So perhaps I would start with you, Mr. Dr. Idro. Maybe help the crowd understand what exactly epilepsy is.
Thank you, Darius. The main feature of this disease is a convulsion. Our brains are made up of millions and millions of brain cells. And the brain cells communicate with each other through a form of electrical discharge. Like the way we have electricity, electricity moves through the wires. So the individual cells communicate with each other, like the electricity flowing through these wires. Okay. And if something goes wrong, you have a seizure. And this seizure is like a short circuit where you have a flash occurring. Okay. And people with epilepsy are patients or people who have repeated attacks of these seizures. So you have a spark or an abnormal occurrence in the brain, and what we see in these patients with epilepsy is that abnormality of an abnormal flow of electricity in the brain and manifesting. So they get repeated attacks of these events, these attacks. And okay. Those repeated attacks is what we call epilepsy.
Okay, so we'll just take it back, just a step back a bit. So explain the brain is like a connection of
very many
different cells
yes.
Which communicate to each other through what we can call electricity. So, and it is in a coordinated, controlled manner. So you talked about something called a seizure. What is a seizure the same as epilepsy, this condition of epilepsy?
No, a seizure or a convulsion is a single event. So that single event, that single attack is what we say a seizure or a convulsion. And a person with epilepsy gets many seizures, gets repeated.
A condition of
seizures.
The seizures occurring. So you can say seizure is sort of like a disorganization to this flow of communication, the flow of electricity between the brain cells. I think that's how we can put it in simple terms.
Yes.
Okay. You also mentioned it's a condition that presents as convulsions. Some people understand epilepsy as a collapsing disease, that someone just collapses and they get accidents. So, Dr. Museveri, how exactly does this epilepsy disease present? How would these seizures manifest?
Thanks, Darius. So, As Richard has put it, that seizure disorders is abnormal brain activity in simple terms. Depending, our brain controls all our activities in the body, and depending on which part of the brain that is affected, or how much of the brain that is having this abnormal electric activity, is the type of seizure you get. What is known to most of us is the patients we see who fall and have these jerky movements. But there are several types of seizures, and we can talk about those who fall and then they get what we call the tonic, clonic, the jerky, and the stiffening. There are also other people who get seizures when they just collapse. Someone gets a seizure and then falls down. They don't have that jerky movements. We also have people who present with non-convulsive movements, so they don't present with any of these jerky movements. They present with changes in their behaviors. In children, we may have children who kind of get episodes where they just stay around and they get repeated attacks of this. If someone, usually when someone is having a seizure, which we call generalized seizure, if you try to interact with them, they don't respond. So these children, if they start staring around and you call them, they will not stare at you. In adults, we may have other presentations like people will get abnormal behaviors. They are really well-functioning members of the society, but they get these episodes where they can get angry, or they can get violent, or they can swear. But what is important about this is that they are short episodes. It takes a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes or less, and when the people are out of this state, they are not aware of what has happened to them. We also have other presentations which are called automatisms. People, they may present with chewing or just staring around. It has been reported that they can do complex activities. What is important with the seizure is that it is a repeated event in a similar manner. This person gets the same presentation every time it comes.
A repeated event in a similar manner.
In a similar manner. So every time it comes, the feeling when it is starting is almost the same. The activities that happen during the event are the same, and the activities that happen after the event are the same. Because normally seizure is divided into 4 parts. We have the prodrome. Some people get this. They get a feeling that they will have a seizure. A number of epileptics may have this, and they just explain they may feel weak, they may feel a bit feverish or something.
Or they may get on some sort of abnormal senses.
Yes, abnormal. Then you get, a number of them can get maybe some headaches starting when the seizure is starting, or some of them may get what we call a focal fit. They may get jerking of one arm, followed by the face and the leg, and this can follow.
So this is kind of the convulsing type.
Yeah, that could be the convulsing, but that's the second step. Then we get the third step where they may jerk completely, and then at the end of it all, when they come out of this whole phase, they may feel a headache, they may sleep. The reason why we are going through this is that if you feel you get an event which is not easily understood by you, and it recurs every other time, it takes a very short time, and then you get out of it, and you may, most of the time, not have a recollection. That may be a seizure, but the presentation may be varied, apart from the...
May be varied.
Yes, may
and
be
it
varied.
may vary between adults and between children.
Yes, and also, yes, adults between adults and children, but also among adults, apart from the seizures which we know. Some of the behavior abnormalities which we get with people may actually fit into the epilepsy. Some of the automatisms which we get with people, provided someone qualifies to have all those other events, it is repeated, it's the same kind of format, and it requires, and it takes a short time and then wears off.
Okay, so in case you've just joined us, remember you're watching the DocTalk show, and we're discussing epilepsy with our team of neurologists from Mulago Hospital. But we also have the non-convulsing, which commonly occurs in children. Dr. Idri, you're more familiar with this presentation, what they call the when a person doesn't collapse, when they don't have that abnormal jerky movements of the body, is this a common presentation in the children, or is it almost the same as for adults?
Many of the features are similar in both in adults and children, only that some are more common in children. One common type in children, which where they do not necessarily converse, are what we call absences. So you have a child who, and usually they're in primary school, P1, P2, P3, and the child is writing some notes and suddenly stops.
And just stops?
For 20 seconds, then starts. And during that time, the teacher says 1 + 1 is equal to,
okay,
then 2 + 2 is equal to, that's when the seizure ends. It takes about 20 seconds. So it affects the child's learning. In between, the child had 1 + 1 is equal to 4, the answer which was 2. In between that, the child lost.
So
and
the child kind of goes into a blank.
Goes into a blank spell.
Okay.
And unfortunately, many of such children in the community, in the homes, people think the child is daydreaming or doesn't pay attention. Some of them get beaten. So those are very common type of epilepsy. We have other
children.
Yes, in children, okay. And it's in school-age children mostly. In infants, children and under the age of 1, we have some very bad types of epilepsy. Some of them we call spasms, where the child gets stiffening, and they come recurrently, and usually when the child wakes up from sleep. And that particular type of epilepsy really the children need attention urgently.
It's common in children below
the age of 1 year.
Age of 1 year.
Yes.
So we won't commonly see them doing the abnormal shaking.
Yes, they will not see the usual jerking movements which we know for people with convulsions. We do not see them in that group.
Okay.
Then we have others where we have children who have what we call myoclonic jerks. This is like sometimes we experience when you're about to fall asleep, your leg or your arm may jerk out.
Okay, just
yes.
one sudden movement.
Yes.
And then...
So there are groups of children who get those repeatedly. And sometimes it is big enough that it can make them fall, but then they get up suddenly. And they may fall badly and actually injure themselves. They may get head injuries. A child is playing and always falling, and you ask yourself, why is this child always falling? Because the child is getting myoclonic jerks. Okay. And these are much more common in children.
Okay, so in kind of to summarize the discussion, you mentioned the epilepsy may be in the convulsing form, where, as Dr. Museveri described, the abnormal shaking and the collapse, and then they shake violently at the body. Or it may be the non-convulsing, which you commonly see in the children, where they kind of go into a blank, or they may have sudden spasms, painful contractions of the muscles, or they may have sudden movement of one of the limbs, one of the legs, or the hands.
Just one small difference. And in children, many of the convulsing epilepsies tend to be focal, that they may affect only a part of the body.
So it may be just like
yes, one hand or the part of the face or the leg, and many times it may not affect the whole body.
Okay, so after the break, we shall come back and discuss some of the causes of epilepsy. Why does epilepsy occur in children? Why does it occur in adults? And what we can do to prevent epilepsy. Please send in your questions or comments and inquiries to our social media platforms, that is on Facebook and on Twitter. And you can also log into YouTube, watching the live stream page on NTV, or go onto the DocTalk show and YouTube pages to catch some of these videos, these discussions that we have on regarding the different health topics that we discuss.
You are watching the DocTalk Show.